1.2 billion pounds. How much is that in queso?
Cheesy gordita!
It's go time! Hey America, with processed cheese, the US government fed an army, filled 1 billion pounds of processed cheese in a cave somewhere in Missouri, and paved the way for Donald Trump to become a pitchman for Pizza Hut. This is a true story. Today in a true story, I'm going to show you how to make a simple processed cheese at home. Processed cheese, it gets a bad rap. At its core, the process in making processed cheese is a great way of making cheese last longer in the fridge, and nothing melts better. The Germans, they've got their Munster. The French may have their Brie, but hey, America, we've got a corner on the melty, cheesy goodness of processed cheese. The process to make processed cheese is pretty easy, but it does take a little math. I've got a bunch of random pieces of cheese here, some cheddar, some sharp cheddar, a little, what is this? Mystery cheese, Gruyere, some Gouda. With this process of processed cheese, the cool thing is you're in control of the product. You can use the cheeses that you like. First, we need to weigh the cheese. We need to zero out the scale. We need to weigh the cheese. 400 times 30% is 120. So we're going to add 120 grams of liquid, and you can use whatever liquid you want. I'm going to use beer, but you could use wine or water. It's really up to your taste and preference. We might have a problem. I need another beer. Hey, I told you there was going to be a little math here. I've got 400 grams of cheese. 30% of that is 120 grams of beer or wine or water or whatever liquid you want. You add those two together, that's 520 grams in total. And then 3% of that you need in sodium citrate. And that is basically the emulsifier for the water and the cheese. So I've got 15.6 grams of sodium citrate. Cheese, measure out. 30% of water, combine the two, 3% of sodium citrate. That's processed cheese. Now, you certainly could grate this by hand, but I found it a lot faster in the food processor. Done! I'm turning my processed cheese into cheese slices, so I need to put this tray in a 200-degree oven to warm up. So we've got to combine our liquid with our sodium citrate, and then just mix that until the sodium citrate dissolves. James Kraft, of Kraft cheese fame, was the one who invented this process of combining an emulsifying salt with cheese. And without the emulsifying salt, the oil in the cheese would just separate when we heat it. So the emulsifier just helps do what it's supposed to do, emulsify. It's hard to believe that Kraft was once a man and not a global conglomerate. The melting process also kills bacteria, which makes the cheese last longer. When James Kraft invented this in 1916, he couldn't sell it. People couldn't imagine a shelf-stable cheese. They thought it was witchcraft. Once the sodium citrate dissolves, we bring this liquid to a simmer. And then we just slowly add the cheese. Before Kraft invented processed cheese, cheese was sold in wheels. Once you broke open a wheel, the cheese would start to spoil. That's why a lot of people got tuberculosis, and it was one of the leading causes of death. Processed cheese saved a lot of lives. Pasteurization and processed cheese saved a lot of lives. So James Kraft has this great product, but no one's buying it because they've never heard of pasteurized cheese. Enter the US government. The Army was looking for a shelf-stable product as it entered World War I, and James Kraft had such the product. The US government bought 6 million pounds of Kraft cheese in World War I, and the soldiers, they fell in love with it. After the war, they brought that taste of Kraft processed cheese back home with them. And so people started liking processed cheese. People no longer feared that it was witchcraft and started eating processed cheese. And Kraft became the first company in the United States to distribute cheese nationally. America's love for cheese became so great that in World War II, the US government bought over 100 million pounds of Kraft processed cheese in 1944 alone. That's a lot of cheese. Enter the era of big government cheese. Oh my God, that looks good. For national security's sake, in support of domestic dairy production, the United States stores millions and millions of pounds of cheese. But in the 1970s and 1980s, things got a little out of control. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter wanted to support dairy farmers, so the US government bought as much excess milk as they possibly could to keep prices in line with inflation. And it worked. The only problem is that milk spoils too quickly. So the United States government started buying dairy products like powdered milk and butter and cheese. But the real issue was that struggling farms were not struggling because of dairy prices. It was because small farms were getting eaten up by larger consolidating ones. In the 1970s, a dairy farm was considered large if it had 100 cows, but today, a large farm usually has over 5,000 cows. And during this buyback program, the larger dairy farms just produced more milk, and the US government just bought it. Once the cheese is fully melted like this, we're going to put it on our cookie sheet. It smells so good. It's so cheesy. And then we just kind of spread it around, and then we cover it in plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator for a couple hours to cool. It's so good. It's got that texture of processed cheese and kind of springiness, but it's like processed cheese on steroids. So I let this cool in the refrigerator for a couple hours, and now we're gonna cut it into slices. I've got some wax paper here as well. I'm going to separate each slice in wax paper. You can slice this cheese any way you want, but I'm using a 3-inch ring mold because I find that's the best for hamburgers. By the early 1980s, the US government was spending over $2 billion a year on government cheese. They were buying 1 in every 4 pounds of US cheddar. 1.2 billion pounds of government cheese was stored in Springfield, Missouri, in an old limestone mine. It was the size of 120 football fields. What does 1.2 billion pounds of cheese look like? But eventually, even processed cheese starts to go bad. And the USDA is like, what the hell am I gonna do with all this cheese? So, the USDA starts dumping cheese on the US military. Base after base, American soldiers are running and fighting on cheese. But that is not enough. So the US government starts dumping cheese on the US school system for Taco Tuesdays and Pizza Fridays. Remember that? From there, the cheese flooded food banks and government food assistance programs as government cheese.
Enough eating a steady diet of government cheese, and living in a van down by the river.
They used to ship it in 5-pound blocks. And then I just wrap these cheese slices in plastic wrap, and they'll last in the refrigerator for about a month. And every time I need a slice of cheese, it's there. And what do I do with the leftovers? Make grilled cheese. By the 1990s, the government changed their program. They switched from buying cheese outright to marketing to fast food restaurants and other suppliers to sell more cheese. They also made deals with the fast food restaurants to subsidize the cheese so they can sell more cheese products on their menu at lower prices. This is the era of the stuffed crust pizza. Can you say stuffed crust pizza?
Ivana. It's wrong, isn't it?
But it feels so right.
Then it's a deal?
Yes, we eat our pizza the wrong way.
Crust first.
Introducing stuffed crust pizza from Pizza Hut. With a ring of cheese baked into a totally new, thinner crust, you'll want to eat it the wrong way. Crust first.
Remember that? So these days, if the government wants to help farmers, generally you'll hear more about direct farm subsidies than buying cheese. The US government still has a stockpile of about 1.4 billion pounds of cheese. For natural disasters, emergencies, war, the cheese is ready. Apparently, we bought cheese instead of N95 masks. My wife's out of town, so it's just beer and grilled cheese. Look at that. That is a cheese sandwich. It's so good. I like cheese. Now, with all this government intervention in the cheese market, US consumers consume 14 pounds more cheese annually than they did in 1990. Go Wisconsin. Well, there you have it. Processed cheese. Another round? Thanks for watching. See you next time.